Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of CESA, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our members and everyone who has joined us today for the 7th webinar in our series on the newly revised CESA practice notes. The webinar is entitled Professional Conduct, Corporate Governance, Professional Development, and Integrity Management. I will be your moderator for this webinar. My name is Francis Gibbons. I'm a professional civil engineer and I serve on CESA's Supply Chain Management Committee. This webinar is the final in the current series of webinars presented by CESA on the revised CESA practice notes. Due to the success and popularity of the current practice note webinar series, the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Management Committee, who is running these webinars, is in favor of holding another webinar series on the practice notes later this year or early next year, so watch this space. In the meantime, however, we are planning 2 more webinars this year, one dealing with the CESA suite of forms of agreement, which will be in July, and one dealing with the ECSA scope of services and fee guidelines as soon as the 2022 guidelines are published. You're kindly requested to share news of these webinars with your colleagues. You may have noticed earlier in the holding slide details regarding the Business of Consulting Engineering program, or BCE, which is an additional resource available to you. The BCE is the flagship of the CESA School of Consulting Engineering and encompasses much of the detail and principles of consulting engineering and the CESA practice notes. It is highly recommended that any engineers wishing to advance their careers in consulting engineering sector should consider registering for this program. For details of the BCE program and the many training courses offered by the School of Consulting Engineering, kindly click on training heading on the CESA website www.cesa.co.za. I would also like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and that the presentations will be available after the webinar and on the CESA website by clicking on the headings guidelines/presentation/CESA practice notes webinars. Before we get started, I would like to outline some of the house rules for our delegates or viewers. On the taskbar at the bottom of the screen, you will see the chat and the Q&A icons. Please use the chat button for any comments you may have and the Q&A button for any questions you would like to ask and to kindly indicate which of the panelists you would like to answer your questions. The questions will be addressed in the 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So please put your questions in the Q&A section and not in the chat section, otherwise we might miss them. To unpack today's topics, we are fortunate to have 3 knowledgeable panelists joining us, for which we thank them greatly. They will each deliver their presentations, and at the end of the webinar, there will be the separate Q&A session. Thereafter, the proceedings will end with some closing remarks. I would like to remind the panelists that they have each been allocated 20 minutes for their presentations. The first panelist is Geoff Mendelowitz, who will address us on the topic corporate governance. Geoff is a professional civil engineer who has previously served as chairperson of the CESA Eastern Cape branch and currently lectures for the Business of Consulting Engineering program at the CESA School of Consulting Engineering. Through his many years spent in the consulting engineering industry, Geoff has great experience and knowledge of our industry, and we are thankful to have him share this knowledge with us today. His talk will be based on the practice note PN82. I would like to hand over to Geoff at this point. Over to you, Geoff.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Welcome all delegates. Very nice to see you and all, even if it's only over the web. Yes, so it's an honor to be here. I'm very happy that I could join you today. And as you say, my talk is on corporate governance of a consulting engineering firm, which really, at the end of the day, I guess, goes around the morals and ethics of us as individuals and us as a society. So without further ado, firstly, just to make sure that more information can be found on practice note PN82. And our purpose today is to provide a framework on corporate governance and the duties of a director. Perhaps some of you are not directors yet. Perhaps there are some directors amongst our delegates today. but each of us has a duty to kind of make sure that we are operating within a framework, which I guess, if you want to sort of summarize it in 2 words, is morals and ethics. But so what is this animal called corporate governance? Why do we actually need it? Why do we need to make rules? Ask ourselves, aren't we moral and ethical enough as professionals, both as individual people and our organizations, to maintain very high moral and ethical standards and always do the right thing? Perhaps another question, well, do you believe that your own and your company's integrity is better, more honest, more valid, higher ethical standards than your competitor or your neighbor next door? And how can you tell this? So I think there are these questions, and you know, they're not new questions. They've been around ever since we've been in business. But I think in the modern world, it's becoming more important to make sure that we are doing the right thing. So what is corporate governance? Okay, it's a system of rules, yes, for how we do things, practices and processes by which a firm is directed and controlled. And essentially involves balancing, I think that's a very important word, balancing the interests of a company's many stakeholders, such as shareholders, the senior management, executives, staff, customers, suppliers, financiers, the government, and the country and the community. So there are a lot of people involved with us today in our businesses, and how do we make sure that kind of we're doing the right thing? That this definition is I think is quite a good one from James Chen for July 21. What's been happening in the last couple of decades or centuries, actually, that corporate governance is becoming more and more important. We live in an ever-changing world. Companies in the 20th century to the 21st century have experienced a huge step change on how we do things, how we operate, how we interact with customers, with shareholders. Obviously, on our own doorstep. If you think about things that have happened with Steinhoff, once the darling of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and everybody had it in their portfolios, in their retirement annuity. The fall of them, Tongaat Hewlett, and then of course our parastatals, Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, SAA. I mean, where was corporate governance in all this when with all the troubles they've been having? And in fact, I mean, it goes further than that. I mean, think about a company like McKinsey, the darling of the management consultant world. You know, on their own website, they say they are the trusted advisor and counselor to many of the world's most influential businesses and institutions. Well, boy, was their corporate governance when they got involved with some dubious practices in South Africa. Shareholder and civil society activism is on the rise. You know, if you're a shareholder these days, you'll go to the shareholders meeting and you might have your say much more than in previous times. And before, we used to really just worry about the economic factors that involve a business. We were concerned, what's the main function of a business is to make profit. But now, really, in the 21st century, we've got to think about society. And we've got to think about the environment, and economic, societal, and environmental needs are really all important, especially if sustainable development is taking center stage. So having said all that, what happened in South Africa is that in 1993, in terms of corporate governance, the Institute of Directors asked retired Justice Mervyn King to chair a committee on corporate governance. And I'm sure you've all heard of King 1, King 2, King 3, and King 4. And just as an aside, it is interesting enough, Justice King viewed this as, to quote, an opportunity to educate the newly democratic South African public on the working of a free economy. And really, I hope that that is still the main goal of King, and that we don't regard it as an onerous set of rules, but as something that kind of we should buy into and kind of and embrace. We're now up to King 4, which was published in 2016. There is a legal framework that corporate governance is tied to. And essentially, the most important act in terms of legalities is the Companies Act 71 of 2008. You're welcome to find that. Chapter 2 talks about the administration of a company, very important. And then Part C and Part F, which talk about these concepts: transparency, accountability, integrity, and Part F, governance. And this is most relevant to most things that are relevant to you are your director, as a director, your personal financial interests, the standard of your conduct in your firm, and your liability. And they're very important. King 4 in 2016 had 5 major points talking about conflict of interests, corporate governance outcomes, ethics, independence, and integrity. And in terms of point 2, they spoke about an ethical culture. And what is this thing called culture? And I'd just like to spend a bit of time with that. But along with culture, you must make sure you have good performance, control, and legitimacy. But culture. So culture is a set of shared assumptions and beliefs, values, and behaviors that operate unconsciously to define how organizations view themselves and their environment. Edgar Schein, MIT professor of management in 1985, there was a lot of work being done in those days on organizational development, organizational behavior, how culture can actually affect a business, and how it can make or break a business actually. But I suppose to put it in a more compact form, culture is a set of common understandings around which action is organized. Think about the culture in your firm as you know, there are different cultures and subcultures, but how do you get things done around here? What do you value? How do you work? So just when you think about corporate governance and culture, there is a very strong and important link. Okay, so in terms of ECSA and CESA, both ECSA and CESA have a lot to say about corporate governance, quite rightly so. ECSA, in terms of the rules and regulations, Professions Act 46 of 2000. So they say registered persons must discharge their duties to their employers, their clients, associates, and the public with due care, skill, and diligence. And they must avoid situations that give rise to conflict of interests or potential thereof. I think maybe you think of some of the situations you may find yourself in with your clients or potential clients. And there is always maybe a balance to be found between what is good for you or what is good for the client, and maybe there's somewhere in the middle, there's something that what is good for both of you. The ethical win-win situation, maybe let's call it. In terms of CESA, CESA has a framework for corporate good governance practice, and they have a whole lot of points, but then I've just highlighted a couple here. Okay, so firstly, no brainer, obey the laws of the country. Okay, and hopefully we're all doing that. So sometimes maybe we don't always agree, but we have to obey the laws of the country. And then if there is a transgression, notify counsel that members have transgressed. Uphold the dignity, the standing, and the reputation of our consulting industry. Tell clients of consequences where professional opinions are overruled on matters relating to the welfare of the society. It's terribly important. I'm sure if you've got some clients that are telling you, well, no, this is too expensive, can't you find a cheaper way? Why are you using so much steel in this concrete beam? I don't know. I mean, there are thousands of different cases, but you actually have to make sure that you're operating ethically and with good standards of professionalism. And of course, sound the alarm where the safety of public is at risk. We've seen some quite horrendous failures in South Africa and in the world, where things have gone wrong with design. And if you as a professional see something that's bothering you, you really have to sound the alarm. And I think probably very important, be impartial in your advice, your judgment, and your decisions. Not that easy, but I think it's these CESA corporate good governance practice guidelines are very important and should be taken to heart in a way. They should be part of what you do. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of our morals and our ethics, I found something quite nice, a young electrical engineer called Leo Nugas, or Nogas, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. He's an electrical engineer, an MBA candidate. He put something on his blog recently. 4 questions to ask re-corporate governance. Number 1, the legal test. Does this action violate the law? Number 2, intuition test. Does this action go against my moral principles? Number 3, the front page test. How would I feel if this action went public on the front page of the Sunday Times or somewhere, or in the old days on the back page of the Sunday Times? And number 4, probably the most important, the mom test. What would my mom think if I did this or that? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I haven't bored you or rushed you, but that is my discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Geoff, for so ably presenting on this topic and including the practical guidelines and tips in your presentation, especially those last 4 questions that we have to ask ourselves, and the way you summarized what governance is about as a duty to operate within a moral and ethical framework. I found that very valuable. These are valuable for members seeking to understand and implement rules relating to good governance in our sector. As previously mentioned, the presentation will be available on the CESA website under guidelines/presentations. CESA does try hard to empower members with useful information through its practice notes and through webinars such as this one. And so this information is really valuable. The second panelist in our webinar today is Wayne Hunt, who will address us this afternoon on the topic Roles of ECSA and CESA. Wayne Hunt is a professional engineer and an active member of CESA Quality, Risk and Sustainability Management Committee. Wayne is a senior civil engineer currently practicing with CESA member firm Knight Pisold. Through his many years in our industry and considerable experience, Wayne is well qualified to address us on this topic. His talk will be based on practice note PN77. I would like to hand over to Wayne at this point. Over to you, Wayne.
Okay, thanks, Francis, and yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity. I think Geoff has introduced my my topic quite well, so I think it follows on quite well. And this is we'll be dealing with practice note 77. So just in summary, what we're going to cover is the purpose of practice note 77, and we'll just go over some of the distinctions between ECSA and CESA. And then we'll cover ECSA and CESA's mandate, role, structure, functions, and their services. Okay, so the purpose of the practice note is to provide members with a comparison of ECSA and CESA with reference to their mandate, role, structure, functions, and services. So both ECSA and CESA aim to advance the reputation of the profession. So this is where it deals with public interest. So we aim to protect the interest of the public. And then as far as they are affected by professional engineering services, they are covered under these 2 councils. So it follows on from the good corporate governance, but dealing more specifically with our industry. So the distinction between the 2 bodies, so the ECSA deals with registered professionals. So these are persons who are registered with the council, whereas CESA, the Consulting Engineers South Africa, deals with member firms, where the member firms are members of the body. So these 2 bodies are similar in the significance of the similarities lies in the guidelines, the rules, being the Engineering Professions Act 46 of 2000, schedule issued under the board notice 41 of 2017, the rules of conduct, and then also the code of conduct for the CESA constitution, the final revised version, which is in June 2019. So these are supplemented by the bylaws, which were revised in 2019, and Annexure A, the Code of Conduct in January 2020. So for more detailed explanation on how these guidelines are structured, you should refer to Practice Note 76, which covers that in detail. Okay, so as a comparison, as I've already mentioned, the ECSA deals with public interest and deals in relation to registered professionals. CESA deals with business ethics amongst members, which are firms, towards their clients. So the codes for the two councils are intertwined and have got similar wording. So starting off with ECSA, so the structure of ECSA is that it has a duty to report to an overarching council, the Council for the Built Environment, similar to the other councils such as the architectural and those type of councils. The controlling body of ECSA is the council, which is appointed by the Minister of Public Works. The council then appoints the CEO, and then the CEO will then appoint staff who will carry out the functions of providing all the services that CESA then provide. So as key role players, they are a voluntary association. The key role players in the two are the voluntary association and registered persons. Okay, so the mission of ECSA, the principal focus of the Act is aimed at promoting the safety, the health, and the interests of the public, as these are affected by engineering work and professional conduct of persons registered with ECSA. But as you can see, I've highlighted the safety, health, and interests of the public. Those are the key things. Then also to ensure through a cooperative process of quality assurance that persons wishing to enter the profession are educated and trained according to widely accepted standards, good industry practice, so that they are able to render professional service for their clients, for the benefit of the public and the country as a whole. Okay, so the role of ECSA is to deal with complaints by an employer or a member of the public or another registered person. So anybody basically, but those are sort of the groups that they are defined as. The statutory functions that ECSA covers are regulating the academic standards, in setting and auditing of professional development, requirements for CPD, to make sure that professionals are learning on a day-to-day basis, continuous learning, and where new methods and better methods, safer methods that are in the public interest come up, that they are aware of those. And there's also new technology. I think technology is advancing. Many of you might have been around when we didn't have computers. So, you know, we used to do drawings by hand. So that's just one example of how the industry has changed over the last few decades. So ECSA also does prescribing and enforcing of the code of conduct, identifying engineering work, and then advising the CBE. Okay, so ECSA then deals with disciplinary action, and many of the people who are reported, I mean, one would think that everybody would have the best intentions, but I'm sure many of you have been in situations or know of situations of people that have been reported not for the right reasons. So there is a formal process that is followed to make sure that any person, registered person that is reported is being treated fairly. And it doesn't happen often, but if it's necessary to preserve the integrity of the industry, then people are removed from as being a registered professional. Okay, then next, moving on to CESA. So in terms of the founding of CESA, it's a private sector based non-profit voluntary organization with a focus on the business and professional interests of consulting engineering firms. The founding documents that are on the website are the Memorandum of Incorporation, the Constitution, the bylaws, and the Code of Conduct. So in terms of the structure of CESA, we're dealing with members. So members are firms that belong to CESA. So CESA provides a number of services, and so obviously being a member gives you access to that. And when your clients appoint you for a certain project, they can have full confidence knowing that you've got the backup of this this body. A principal is a competent management representative of that member firm. And then activities are managed by a well-structured organization, and I'll give a bit more detail on that later in terms of the services and the way that it's managed. And it's controlled by a board, so everything is done in a proper way. So the services to members and clients managed by these departments. So in CESA, you've got the School of Consulting Engineering, Strategic Communication, Client Liaison, Contractual Affairs, Public Relations and Marketing, Document Sales, Membership, Finance, and Admin. So you can see there's a lot happening behind the scenes to make everything happen. So CESA has an affiliation to FIDIC. It's affiliated with the International Body for Consulting Engineering Associations, also known as FIDIC. It has borrowed several of their founding principles, codes, guidelines, and documents. So the three there, as you can see, are Quality Management Information Guidelines, the Risk Management Information Guidelines, and the Business Integrity Management Guidelines. The mission of CESA is that CESA is committed to enhancing the professional and business interests of its members. So by following the code of conduct and receiving all the support enables member firms to add better value to their clients' businesses. And it also indirectly then improves the quality of life for all South Africans by the promotion of engineering excellence. And serving clients with professionalism, integrity, and independence of judgment. So CESA provides an oversight role. CESA is committed to the upholding of engineering and professional standards and the maintenance of quality by its members. And as Geoff mentioned, I mean, CESA is aware of ethical problems in our industry, and these need to be addressed. So if anybody is aware of incidences where this is an issue, it should be reported. As Francis mentioned earlier, you can email Wally or contact any of the members. Okay, some of the functions of CESA is to promote the interests of its members and clients by regular liaison meetings, publication of documents, practice notes to members like these webinars that are being presented, guidelines to members on professional practice matters. So as these arise in court cases or the like, that members are aware of the latest developments in the industry. And then there's also a peer review and quality management program. So in an instance where you need to have a design check, for example, there are member firms that can do peer reviews. So clients do make use of this. There's a publication of a directory of firms and newsletters. So keeping track of that. There have been proposals and tenders that have been submitted where there's a requirement to have at least a quality management system and membership of CESA. So this directory of firms does validate that. It also arranges seminars, workshops, and conventions, which brings back brings together industry leaders and makes sure that the industry is doing the best that it can. Then provision of CETA accredited CPD training. So this is a requirement all around the world to make sure that the industry is at the forefront of developments. And then membership of and liaison with FIDIC. So FIDIC does its own functions and mandates, and a lot of the lessons learned internationally are then filtered down into CESA. So CESA has a quality assurance focus. It represents for its members a body which promotes their joint interests, and because of its standing in the following aspects, CESA provides implicit quality assurance for its clients. So as I mentioned previously, peer reviews, that makes a difference not only in terms of quality, but also value for money. It also makes sure that firms and registered persons are having their own work reviewed, so that we don't have unnecessary errors going through to construction. Continuous education is a big aspect, I'm sure, in all of your firms. Also ensuring that there's a succession plan in each of the member firms, so that in the event of a CEO or some of the senior people leaving, that there is continuity within each of the organizations. And then professional indemnity. So professional indemnity also ensures that that our work is insured, but also helps with contract negotiations where firms don't want to take on unnecessary risks, and one can use your insurer's requirements as part of that negotiation. Okay, that's all from my side. Thank you. I'll hand you back to Francis.
So thank you very much, Wayne, for that, delivering an excellent presentation. And I'm sure it'll assist members in understanding the different roles played by CESA and ECSA, as well as their codes of conduct. I like the way you presented CESA as a body that's supporting its members and providing those services to them. And in that regard, just to remind everyone that the presentations and the webinar will be available on the CESA website. We did have a question about that. So it's under the website address is www.cesa.co.za, and you can look at the, sorry, I was just going to find the, yeah, it's under guidelines, stroke presentation, stroke CESA practice notes webinar. So you'll find the recording under there after the webinar's over. Okay, then the final panelist will be Clarke, who will speak on the topic integrity aspects. Clarke is a professional engineer and an active member of the CESA Supply Chain Management Committee. Craig is a mechanical engineer with over 40 years experience in that field and is a CESA past president as well. Craig was also extensively involved in the recent revision of the CESA practice notes. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Craig. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Francis, and welcome everybody to the final talk of the day. You've heard Geoff talk about corporate governance in firms, in businesses, and you've heard Wayne explain the role of CESA and ECSA in looking at integrity and integrity management and codes of conduct and so on. And my purpose today is to talk to you about how does CESA have a role in maintaining standards of integrity? How does CESA manage the integrity process when things go wrong and there is a need to deal with an integrity matter? The talk is part of the series of webinars dealing, and today's webinar deals with professional conduct and development. And I just want to mention there isn't actually a specific practice note on the website dealing with this subject, but CESA does have an integrity management framework document which describes much of what I'll be talking about, and it's either available on the website now or it's shortly going to be available, but not as a practice note. So if we go to the very beginning, and if you look at the first page at the preamble of the CESA Constitution, you will find that there are 4 cornerstones, and one of those cornerstones is the fact that CESA's member firms are of a high professional repute and they uphold ethical standards. So that is one of the absolutely fundamental aspects of CESA and what it stands for. And then in terms of clause 3.2.1 of the CESA Constitution, it states that the CESA, the body, the organization, must establish and enforce rules of conduct, and for that purpose it may suspend and or terminate the membership of a firm and or reprimand and or fine a firm. So what that really means is that there is an inherent duty on CESA as a body to maintain standards of integrity amongst its members. And that is why we take it so seriously, and we actually have an integrity management system within the association. And if I can just digress for a moment, and this is something very personal to me, professional service providers like us, like engineers, doctors, lawyers, and ministers of religion, we all sell or give or produce an intangible product. We don't sell something you can visualize, and the quality of our product cannot be easily measured. And this is the fundamental reason why a client has to have absolute and complete trust that the service provider will provide absolute care in delivering the service with all skill, care, and diligence. That is the fundamental purpose of any professional person. And that's the reason why CESA has such a fundamental duty to maintain standards of integrity amongst all our members. And then just an important little item is to remember that CESA's disciplinary processes are informal. They are for internal use only within the membership of the association, and any of the findings of an integrity investigation cannot be used in any subsequent litigation or a court of law. That's quite important. So if we look at the CESA Code of Conduct, you will find that it's broken down into 2 main sections. The first is the regulatory requirements, where it specifies certain important items such as member firms having the necessary competencies, skills, and resources, and absolutely fundamental, not permitted to indulge in any form of corruption or other misconduct. And then there's perhaps the less tangible requirements of integrity, good practice standards, we call them, integrity, interest of society, impartiality, fairness to other members, how to go about reviewing or taking over work of another member. And then there are a few other things like the requirement that firms must preserve all records for a period of at least 10 years. There are aspects related to reckless price competition and, of course, quality management. So those are all items in the CESA Code of Conduct, and those are items which member firms are required to adhere to. So if we now look at CESA and integrity and how it manages integrity, in the past, there was a committee of counsel known as the Disciplinary Committee. Some years ago, that committee, I wouldn't say fell into disuse, but it became a cumbersome machine to operate or to manage integrity matters, because you had a whole committee of people. They were actively involved in CESA member firms, so you had potential for conflict of interest. You had to arrange things that this whole committee could get together and deal with matters, and it became a very cumbersome and lengthy process, which made everybody unhappy. So a couple of years ago, CESA introduced a new way of managing integrity, and that is to set up the Integrity Committee. And the Integrity Committee currently comprises 3 committee members, each of whom is a retired principal of a CESA member firm, and retired principal, and each of whom has served on the CESA board, preferably as the president of CESA. So those people are all well experienced in matters related to consulting engineering. They have a lot of knowledge and experience to fall back on. And most importantly, all being retired, they have no direct connection with any member firm or even with any part of CESA itself. They are impartial and independent. The purpose of the committee is to investigate and make findings concerning alleged transgressions of the CESA Code of Conduct. And that's very important, because it's not just any old thing. There has to be an actual transgression of this Code of Conduct. CESA, the CEO and Contractual Affairs Manager, both provide admin and logistical support, but they're not involved in any of the decision making. Decisions are all done by consensus or simple majority, and the purpose of the committee is to make recommendations and determinations, which are then given to the board, who actually take the action. Because remember, it's the CESA board that is the ultimate body that manages everything CESA does. So as I've said previously, the Integrity Committee is independent, impartial, and without any outside influence. And obviously, if there's the slightest hint of involvement by one of those committee members, they have to recuse themselves. How does a disciplinary procedure actually take place? Well, first of all, the directorate, the board, or the council might become aware of a possible transgression. That might be through the media or any other way that they become aware of a thing, of a problem, or a client body, a member of the public, or a CESA firm lays a complaint. Complaints have got to be in writing. They actually must be referenced to a specific clause in the Code of Conduct. The Contractual Affairs Manager will assist the complainant to formulate the complaint. There's got to be clear evidence and not just a rumor. There must be clear evidence. And remember that integrity matters, when it comes to CESA, must be by a firm and not individual employees within a firm. Such employees obviously go to ECSA. Having said that, of course, if an individual an employee of a firm misbehaves, it's up to that firm to rectify the situation. So the firm can't just turn its back on the behavior of its employees. It must take the appropriate action. And then obviously, CESA only looks at transgressions by CESA member firms, not anyone else. And just again, a slight digression is that we do get, CESA receives quite a number of complaints about actions of members. And very often, in fact, in the majority of cases, these complaints turn out to be contractual issues. So for example, a client may phone CESA and say, oh, this engineer is overcharging me, or he's trying to charge me for something that he's not due for payment. That sort of matter is a contractual matter, which CESA will try to help with, but CESA can't get involved in contractual disputes of any nature. That's got to be dealt with in terms of the client-consultant agreement and the processes of dispute resolution that are described there. We also have complaints about capacity and expertise and competence. So quite often a complaint will be received that a firm is doing work which it doesn't have the competence or expertise to do. And that, of course, is quite a difficult matter to look at. It can be very subjective, but CESA will try and assist with that. And obviously, if a firm takes on work which it is not competent to handle, that actually in itself is a transgression of the code of conduct. So CESA would certainly get involved in that sort of situation. But remember that there has to be clear evidence of a transgression and not just a rumor. So it's quite a difficult one to prove. Generally, real complaints about transgressions of the codes of conduct, luckily, this is not a common thing. There are very few each year, perhaps 2, 3, 4, very unusually if it's more than 5 complaints each year. Most of the complaints are managed quite easily by the CESA directorate, by the CEO or the contractual affairs manager. But occasionally they do get referred to the integrity committee. The sort of items in the code of conduct that are most commonly a problem are, first of all, fairness to other members, and where the client replaces his first consulting engineer with another consulting engineer for some reason or the other. Another complaint that is sometimes received is where an engineer reviews or takes over the work of another engineer. And if I can just stop at those 2 points, because those are, without a shadow of doubt, the most common complaints about transgressions that CESA receives. And just as a word of advice to all our members is to be extremely careful where you find yourself in a situation where you are taking over the work of another consulting engineering firm. Make sure that the matter has been handled ethically and correctly by the first firm, by the client, and by yourself. Don't get involved in a matter which can really turn ugly later on. So be very careful under those circumstances. Obviously, as I mentioned, you should only take on work which you have the competence, the skills, and expertise to handle. Another very occasional complaint is where work is done by unregistered or unqualified persons. So the leadership and control of projects must always be under a suitably qualified and registered and experienced person. And then obviously another matter is not acting in the client's best interest and gross overcharging, which we do see occasionally. So the actual disciplinary process and how we go about that, first of all, the complaint is routed to the CESA directorate, as I mentioned earlier, to either the CEO or the contractual affairs manager. He will discuss it with the complainant to get an understanding of the matter, to make sure that it is a real case of a transgression of the code of conduct, and he will attempt to achieve an amicable resolution with both the parties. And this is often done with informal discussions and can very often be done via the telephone or email. If, however, the complainant has a, I'm hesitating a little bit because the complainant, first of all, must have a genuine case of a transgression, but in addition to that, he must be sufficiently motivated to go through the process of laying a complaint and seeing the integrity process taking place, which is, it's a difficult matter. It's stressful, it's unpleasant, it's not something we like to do. So it's not a process that you want to start lightly. It should only happen where you are really serious. So the actual process starts off once you've got past the initial discussion stage. The CESA directorate will arrange a formal meeting, which must be attended by both parties. That's the complainant and the, let's call it the accused party. The meetings may be virtual or they may be around a table. Just remember that the findings are not for use in a court of law in any subsequent litigation. The Integrity Committee will decide on a sanction to be applied and will report the findings together with the recommended sanction to the CESA board, who will make the ultimate decision and, if necessary, implement the findings of the committee. Now, one obviously finds, just as in any court of law, that sometimes the process of the disciplinary hearing, some information may not have come to light, further information have been there, mistakes may be made by any of the parties. So the integrity process allows for an appeal. So either party, the complainant or the accused, may appeal against the finding, as long as it's done quickly within 1 week. The Integrity Committee will then review any further written evidence from both parties, and but only very unusually would there be any further meeting or oral evidence provided. The committee will then either uphold or discharge its previous decision, and it will communicate its further findings to both the parties. And then, even at that point, if still dissatisfied, the complainant or the accused person may further appeal directly to the CESA board. So you go through the initial hearing, you go through the appeal process. If you're still dissatisfied, you may appeal to the CESA board in the form of the president of CESA, and the CESA board will then make a final finding, and at which point that is final. The CESA then must decide on the sanctions, and as I said, they would be recommended by the Integrity Committee and normally upheld by the board. They may involve one or more of suspension of the firm, temporary suspension of membership, permanent termination of membership, a reprimand, and a fine not exceeding 10,000 Rand. And I think fundamental to all of that is publication of the Integrity Committee's findings. And it is quite interesting that that is not specified in the CESA constitutional rules, but it is something that has to be determined by the Integrity Committee and or the CESA board, and they will decide how to make the findings public in any form. And I think that is me done. It is me done. I hope I've given you a bit of an insight into the manner in which CESA manages integrity in the association. And I'm happy to hand you back to Francis. And I look forward to any questions just now. Over to you, Francis.
Thanks, Craig, for a very interesting presentation that provided useful guidelines for acting with integrity within our sector. Craig's presentation, I'd like to remind you, will be uploaded to the CESA website, and it'll undoubtedly be invaluable to members as they implement integrity systems or requirements within their practices against the background of how CESA deals with disciplinary matters. So I would like to thank our presenters for all finishing early. So we're slightly ahead of schedule, so we can allow a few more questions. I have at this stage had 2 questions, and so I'd like to read them to you. The first one is from it's from William Kennedy, and it's addressed to Geoff, and it's about ethical behavior. And the question is 60% to 80% discounted fees ethical? So I think that's a landmine that you're going to have to land, a minefield that you're going to have to walk through there, Geoff. So over to you with that.
It's a great question, and it's a great question, and it really goes to the heart of our consulting engineering industry and what we've been struggling with for I don't know how long. So there's a long answer and there's a short answer. Firstly, let me say that personally, I dislike the word discount intensely. I think discounting is for when you're going to buy your milk or your chicken at either Checkers or Pick and Pay, and they're providing you a discount because they've got a surplus and they can give you a better price. So the short answer is a 60 to 80% discount on fees. No, I don't think it is ethical. However, of course, and that's the however part. CESA and there's ECSA guidelines for fees, and kind of so there should be a feel, and there should be a feel between the client and the consultant as to what a equitable and fair fee is. And I think those around that, maybe there's some room for negotiation. Some consultants may be a bit light on work, and they say, well, let's take this on at a slightly lower rate because we need the work, or we want to encourage the client. We want to impress this as a new client. So there are reasons for maybe not cutting your fee, but essentially I say don't do it. It's this for me. Engineers are the same. We professional, just as doctors, lawyers, and so on. If I go and have an operation, which I've just had as a matter of interest, oversharing, I did not ask my surgeon, listen, you're doing keyhole surgery. Surely that's a bit less than cutting my whole side open. How about a discount? We don't do it. We don't ask other professionals. So my view is that why should we ask anybody for discounts in a professional environment? We can go on and on. And maybe Craig, you want to have a word? I'm sure all of us are quite passionate about this, but that is my shortish answer.
Thank you very much, Geoff. I think that's very ably answered. The next question is from Nati Mohani, and it's to Wayne. And it's how prevalent are complaints with registered members at ECSA against each other and from clients? So how prevalent are there complaints from clients and other members against members at ECSA? I'm not sure if you have that information, Wayne.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I was sort of close to the coalface in that regard a while ago. I haven't recently, so I'm not sure how, but it wasn't very prevalent. So there were not many instances of it, and they are quite dealt with quite rigorously. So yeah, I'm not really that close to ECSA at the moment, but as far as I know, that it's not really something that happens too often.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just add to that?
Please, Craig.
I think somewhere I have seen that ECSA actually publishes statistics of the number of cases dealt with, and I couldn't put my finger on it. It may be something you can find on their website. Just off the top of my head, I kind of vaguely remember a figure of around 10 to 20 cases per year, maybe more, 10 sort of number, but it's a bit of a guess. I don't really know. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Greg. I think that's the best we can answer that question. And then the third question from an anonymous attendee, and I think I'll put it to Craig first. Does CESA have a record of how many of their member firms have social and ethics committees?
I'm afraid that is that's a question I can't answer. I don't know whether either Wayne or Geoff can answer, or perhaps yourself, Francis. No, I don't have any idea at all. If I can just make a comment again off the top of my head, and this is based on my own experience with my old firm, is we certainly did not have a formal committee, but I think ethics and what was the second word? Ethics and quality. But
social and ethics committees.
Yeah, okay. We didn't have a formal committee, but ethics was certainly kind of the top of our agenda in dealing with management. It was part of our absolute culture. But I don't have the statistics for.
If I might add, I think most member firms have things called vision and mission, you know, which really, as I said, and part of your vision and mission really goes to the culture of your firm, which I did speak about, and the culture will determine how your ethics are. So there's always some form of ethical and moral kind of thread running through your firm, but whether you formalize it into committee, I don't know. I mean, certainly I was with a big multinational firm. We didn't particularly have a moral and ethics committee, but I think we were guided enough by sort of our rules and what was right or wrong to understand that we were within some sort of pathway that was good.
Thanks, Geoff. Okay, so unfortunately we can't answer that question better. Perhaps I can ask Wally to have a look at it and respond by email. But anyway, we'll respond on the webinar recording. Okay, then I've got a question in the chat room. So please, can I just remind you to post questions on the Q&A box, because it's otherwise we have to monitor both. And the question is, how active is CESA in investigating issues where we have seen certain organization in the news where they have been cited in partaking in unethical practices? And perhaps that's also the Zondo Commission report 4 comes in. And Craig, I'm going to pass you that one.
Yeah, I think that is a question I can answer, because in a way that was one of the features that probably pushed CESA into sorting out the integrity committee to deal with exactly that type of matter, because it happens quite often, and it's an extremely sensitive issue, because we have to be extremely careful. I mean, CESA member firms' names have popped up in various cases or instances over the last several years where they have been involved in projects where there have been one or other, shall we say, allegations of corruption or corrupt practices. And in most of those cases, I would say that it's turned out that the consulting engineering firm involved was simply an innocent participant in a project, and had nothing to do whatsoever with the corruption, but their names had been kind of involved, or they'd become involved because of their association on the project. So we have had complaints of this nature. We've had to look at them extremely carefully. And if there is any clear sign of involvement by that firm, CESA certainly has and will take action. And it did happen a couple of years ago. And yeah, it's obviously one of the more high profile cases around, and that firm was I think, suspended or its membership was terminated. But pending the outcome of various court cases, which are still on the go. And so CESA, yeah, we certainly will try very hard. I think it's fundamental to us, but people must realize the sensitivity and difficulty.
Thank you, Craig.
Question.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah. So referring to the question before this one about does CESA have a record of how many of their member firms of Social and Ethics Committee, the anonymous attendee has identified himself. And he says, sorry, that should not have been anonymous. It is Jabulili Maziza from J&W. Would be interested to know once you find out. That's in respect of how many firms of Social and Ethics Committees. It became a requirement for us from a financial audit based on our public interest score, and it's a great addition to our committee. So most welcome recommendation from the auditors. Thanks. So, okay, Jabulili, we'll get Wally to respond to you. Okay, and then we've got a new question from Peter Sharland. How should member firms approach the ethics in the situation where the client takes full-time supervision of construction upon themselves, but still asks the consultant to monitor construction and sign off on completion? Okay, interesting question. Who am I going to pass this to? Anyone volunteering? Craig?
I wonder if one of the others would like to answer first. I have a view on it, but it's easy for a retired person to have a view on a subject like this, because I would say don't get involved. But perhaps Geoff or Wayne would like to answer.
No, Craig, I'm with you there. You know, the things, I mean, when you go into a contract with a client, you know, you should be specifying what your level of service is, you know, and I mean, there are guidelines as to how much site supervision you should have. And, you know, if the client says, no, well, we don't need you anymore, you know, we're going to look at our own quality, that's a problem. It's a problem for me. I don't know how you resolve it, but the only way is to go back to your original contract and say, well, what did we sign for? You know, that's about all I can say. But yeah.
Actually, what I'd like to just mention there is that I'm really longing for the 2022 ECSA guideline to be published, because it was it's one of the things that we really tried hard to address in that guideline and to overcome. And I think the important aspect to try to deal with here, and I know it's not easy, but to point out to the client, first of all, that if you are not allowed if the client will not appoint you to do the adequate level of site supervision, the client is transferring the risk back to themselves. You cannot take that risk if you can't see the work. The biggest difficulty is your final line of your thing about signing off, because I'm not sure what type of project you're talking about, but if, for example, it's a building project, there's a Form 4 that has to be signed off on completion, and if you have not been able to do the right level of site monitoring, it's difficult to sign that. But yeah, I'd like to think about that question and a proper answer to it. I think a lot goes about making the client aware that he's taking the risk. I think if you study the building regulations, and I'm talking now about building projects and Form 4s, you will find that the wording of the regulations is such that it does tie your level of responsibility to the level of inspection that you were required to do. So I'm not answering the question directly, but I think the most important point is to point out to the client that he is taking on that responsibility. And if that
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I'm not sure, Peter, if you're referring to an NEC situation where the client is the project manager under NEC, and you are the supervisor. So, and I know in that situation, the client is deciding on all the financial side and the awarding of claims, etc. And you are just making sure that the design is built according to the drawings, or that the construction follows the drawings. So that is a difficult situation, and unfortunately under NEC it's allowed. So I think the other thing under a normal appointment under a CESA form of agreement, or under a FIDIC form of agreement, where you are the engineer, but the client now wants you to stop doing that and let him do it, but still sort of stay engineer in name. I think the other way to handle it is by allowing the client to second site personnel to your team, and but obviously then you remain in charge as the person responsible for construction administration and for approving finally the works. But I think this is quite an issue that we could debate a while. So I hope we've dealt with your question. Wayne, any points you'd like to raise?
Yeah, I think a number of the questions are related. So what I wanted to say, especially with the 60 to 80% fee discounting and a number of the other questions, I think look, you've got private sector and public sector, and I think the way that in the public sector, especially, that consultants are procured, the way that it's done elsewhere in the world is they will do it by invited tender, and then the consultant whose price is close to the average, which will be a more decent fee or way of appointing it, will improve the situation, so that you don't have that whoever's lowest wins the work. There's negotiated fees, panel appointments. I know the Western Province still does panel appointments, so that consultants have got sufficient fees to actually do the work that they need to. In other parts of the world, they use design and build. So I know that CESA has had a number of initiatives where we've tried to approach government to change the procurement system, and I think that would resolve some of the issues, but that's sort of quite long term. It's not something that's going to change in the near future. On the private sector, there you can negotiate your contract with your client, and if he's not appointing you to do supervision, then that's a service that you shouldn't provide. So that's my. Also, I think it's quite a hot topic. We could have a whole webinar just on fee discounting and procurement itself. But I think, Clarke, in one of your previous webinars, you did mention that the current state of corruption and the heavy fee discounting is causing a destruction of our industry. So I think we mustn't take that lightly. It is a valid point. So yeah. That's all from my side.
Thanks, Wayne.
In fact, Wayne, thank you. You struck a sensitive note there. I've been trying to think of things to say in various presentations and in our lecturing to our BCE students about fee competition, and I believe there's nothing wrong with fee competition, but reckless fee discounting, it's a massive problem. I don't know whether it's an ethical problem or not, but it is a massive problem. And I think a lot of the ethical side of it doesn't come in the discount offered. It comes in the way that the firm then subsequently tries to handle the work, which they can't do because they can't do it commercially. But the real message I want to take across is that if fee discounting doesn't get sorted out in South Africa, and I'm talking about the level of fee discounting that we're seeing at the moment, if it doesn't get sorted out, then the consulting engineering industry, in fact, the built environment industry is going to collapse. And if that happens in this country, that will be the end of infrastructure development for the country as a whole. So the future of South Africa depends on us as an industry and as government and as national treasury in finding a way around this whole question of, I'm not going to say fee competition, that's not what it's about, it's fee discounting. It is terrible and it's got to stop somehow. That's my final answer. It doesn't solve the problem, but it's the way I feel from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, and now I've got a comment from Jacques Kotzer, and it's relating to Peter Sharlin's question about how should member firms approach the ethics in a situation where the client takes the full-time supervision of construction upon themselves, but still asks the consultant to monitor construction and sign off the completion. And Jacques' comment is, if you still sign off on activities on behalf of the client, although not appointed to do that, and the client is doing it themselves, you will still carry the full liability. So why would you do that and take a risk for which you're not being rewarded? Thanks, Jacques. That is a very apt comment. Okay, we've come to the end of the questions. So I think without further ado, I will go on to the wrap-up session. So please, first of all, if you do have questions that you haven't addressed here, you're welcome to email Wally Main at wally@cesa.co.za. And any questions that you may still have or were not answered during the webinar, he will attend to and see that they are answered. So colleagues and friends of CESA, at this point, we have reached the end of the webinar. And I would like to thank the panelists for availing of their time, both at the webinar and in their preparation work, and for sharing their knowledge and thoughts with us. And of course, a big thank you to you, our delegates, for supporting CESA and attending our 7th Practice Notes webinar. Before we close the session, we would like to invite you to submit any comments or suggestions you may have regarding our Practice Notes webinars, with a view to improving them and making more useful. And if you have any ideas for webinars in the future. So you are welcome to suggest topics that you would like addressed at future webinars. And again, please send these to Wally Main at wally@cesa.co.za. In closing, I would like to kindly request delegates to complete the satisfaction survey that will pop up on your screen. The purpose of the survey is to provide us with your satisfaction ratings or feedback, and that will enable us to improve our future webinars. Delegates registered with ECSA may claim 0.15 CPD points for attending this webinar as per our webinar attendance list. For ease of administration, CPD certificates will be sent to you on completion of the satisfaction survey. So please do the satisfaction survey if you want your CPD points. And then as a very last point, we'd like to ask members to regularly check their spam or junk folders for CESA correspondence in the case it has ended up there. We'd also like to request that you whitelist the email addresses that CESA uses. So with that, thank you again for your attendance and participation, and I would like to wish you a good day further. Thank you very much.